In case it wasn't immediately obvious, I am in fact wearing a wig. I'm currently in the process of changing up my hair, and it's at that weird in-between dyeing stage, so it just looks awful. So I reached into my wig bag. This was the first one that I pulled out, so I'm unintentionally semi-cosplaying Daphne today. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Hazel Jane, and today, I completely forgot my intro then, we are back with another episode of Monsters, Myths and Makeup, which is a little series that I have where we get to delve into the weird and wonderful world of monsters and myths, whilst I attempt to bring these stories to life through a makeup look inspired by the creatures behind the legends. If you have any interest in mythology and or makeup, I would recommend hitting subscribe because that basically covers a lot of what I do. For those of you who are already subscribed, thank you. Feel free to leave a like, if you like the video, that is. Now, last week's episode I tried something a little bit different. We went with more of like a voiceover style because there was a big prosthetic piece involved and it was a whole thing. But the feedback that I got was actually quite positive, and some people said they preferred that format because they could then see basically the whole process of creating the look. Now, whilst this week's look does not involve a big face prosthetic, there is quite a lot of very fine detail work in it. So I'm going to stick with the voiceover format for this week just to see how it goes with these more like detailed looks. Again, please let me know in the comments if you prefer it, don't mind. Either way, I might just do like a bit of a mix of both going forward. Big thank you to my Patreons for helping me choose this week's topic. If you're interested in having a bit of an input in what episodes you want to see, I will leave a link to the Patreon in the description down below. But this week's topic is actually one that I've had my eye on for a little while. It's a bit more of an obscure folktale legend kind of thing rather than like a super well-known one, but it's infinitely fascinating. Oh, last thing before we dive into this week's episode, I have a very exciting new announcement coming soon. I'm just finalizing some of the last few like moving pieces of it and putting it all together. If you want to have a bit more of like a sneak preview at what the hell I'm talking about, again, go and have a look at the Patreon because early access and behind the scenes will all be going on there first. But it's very exciting and I'm very excited to share it with you all very, very soon. That being said, it's time to crack on. So grab a Red Bull, grab a Monster, grab a seat, and let's go. For those of you who are interested in the makeup side of things, I will leave links to all the products that I use in the description box down below. And as always, I will apologise in advance for any and all errors in pronunciation of names, words, places. A lot of this research goes into ancient history and it covers areas from all over the world. Some of the words that I come across are really hard to say. I do always try my best, but if I do get any of them wrong, please feel free to correct me in the comments down below. Now, last episode we looked into the mother of all sea monsters, the hell-mouthed Leviathan, and this week we're moving up onto the land to look at an entity from Finnic folklore that, like the Leviathan, also has numerous connotations and links to the devil. Now, this entity is known as the Hiisi. However, the exact definition of this word has changed quite significantly over time. The first reference I saw was actually from Reddit, and it was a folk story about something called the Gates of Hiisi, which is a big ravine in Sotkava in Finland, which was believed to be the nest of a Hiisi. However, before we look into that, we need to try and have a look at exactly what a Hiisi is, because as I said, the meaning of the word has evolved a lot. So there's a little bit of crossover in the actual origin of the word, because the Hiisi was originally a spirit, often associated with like hills, mountains, forests, and certain forest animals. Now in Estonian, the word Hiis refers to a sacred grove, surrounded by trees and usually on some kind of elevated ground. And I'll be honest, when I read that, the only thing I could picture, and I can't unpicture it, is like the sacred druid grove from Baldur's Gate 3 in Act 1. So that's the kind of thing that I had in my head the entire time I was doing this research. Now, in the magic songs or spells of the Finns, they would use the term Hiisi in association with hills and mountains and groves, sometimes referring to this spirit as like the owner or ruler of those areas of land. More recent interpretations, the crossover between the Finnish Hiisi and Estonian Hiis has associated both of them with like sacred areas, but in particular sacred burial sites. And then a secondary meaning has been applied to Hiisi, which refers to large and unusual geographical features. It was actually following the Christianization of Finland and Estonia that the original meanings of the word became somewhat blurred, and this led to the word Hiisi being used as a proper noun in the form of a name for a deity or spirit. This evolution in meaning led to the application of anthropomorphism to Hiisi sites, which is when a non-human entity is attributed with human traits or feelings or emotions. I.e., these big, irregular geographic formations and features, these Hiisi sites, became associated with things like giants, and the word Hiisi slowly evolved to kind of mean the same sort of thing. Now, as well as the change in meaning of the word, the Christianization of these areas around the 12th and 13th centuries also led to the idea that the Hiisi was evil in nature, and this was then magnified over time to the point where the Hiisi became akin to a Christian devil, or in some cases, the devil. There was a Finnish bishop called, bear with me, Mikael Agricola from the 16th century, who was actually often considered the founder or father of literary Finnish, who compiled a list of Finnish pagan gods, which included Hiisi as a god of forest, game, or fur, which was a title that was shared with another Finnish spirit or god known as Tapio, the king of the forest. But before the Christians came and changed the meaning of the word, the original folklore surrounding the Hiisi was primarily oral folklore, so it was stories and tales that were passed down through families and generations within that area. Most of these stories described the creatures that lived and dwelt within the Hiisi sites, typically things like trolls and giants, and many of the stories explained how odd rock formations and other geographical features were created by these creatures, which is obviously then basically where Christianity came in and confused the terms, which caused the giants and trolls that lived within the Hiisi sites to then become known as the Hiisi. Now, the majority of these folktales came from one particular village, or at least the majority of recorded folktales came from one village, a place called Narva, which is in Vesilahti in the southwest of Finland. Now, these tales include fishermen catching cauldrons full of coins after they'd rolled down a cliff, and how the cliff itself was created by giants, throwing rocks, basically. Although there is a variation on that secondary tale that takes on a much more Christian element, in that the giants were actually throwing rocks into the sea to try and prevent people from attending church by boat. Which kind of reminds me of one of the stories that I came across when I was looking into the origins and legend of pixies, and how they used to try and kidnap the bell ringers in a way of trying to stop a church from being built in their little village. But over time, and again thanks to the influence of Christianity, the original aspect of nature's greatness and awe in the form of these incredible geographic formations was slowly minimized with regards to the Hiisi, and they were no longer considered the creatures and beings that created these landscapes, and instead they became these purely evil spirits, comparable in some ways to things like trolls. These later interpretations depicted the Hiisi in a huge range of sizes, usually on the smaller side, but with some of them still retaining that gigantic nature. It's said that they would travel in noisy groups and they would attack people who didn't move out of the way for them, and that if you left your doors open, a Hiisi would be able to come inside and steal things from you. However, if you were ever chased by a Hiisi, you could seek refuge in an area that had been cultivated, because in the folklore influenced by Christianity, cultivated areas were considered blessed, and as such, the evil Hiisi couldn't step inside it. This was quite an interesting note, because the more pagan beliefs that were prevalent in the area before this often considered the raw, forbidding features of nature to be the areas that were blessed by some element of holiness. It was those untamed wild forests that were sacred, not the areas that had been cultivated by man. It's actually a really common thing that I'm noticing more and more in my research on these topics, especially into any kind of mythology or folklore that does have more of a pagan origin. It's just how much Christianity tried to move people away from celebrating or worshipping nature, which, considering that within Christianity, everything in nature falls under the realm of like God's creation, it's interesting that they seem to have tried to like demonize a lot of these figures that were associated with nature. Now, there are many other tales of the Hiisi that come from all over Finland. One that comes from a place called, and you will have to bear with me because I'm definitely going to butcher this, Pyhäjärvi, which is in central Finland. Now, this town has multiple place names that refer to Hiisi, and the story goes that Hiisi, a giant who had lived near the town long before the humans had settled, had eventually grown sick of the noise that they made after moving there. He had lived in something called a Hiidenlinna, or Hiisi Castle, which was on the Hiidenniemi, which is a Hiisi's peninsula, before he then decided to tear down his castle, basically, in an effort to fly away from these noisy, irritating humans. I feel like I definitely need someone to keep track of how many times I say the word Hiisi within this video. It's a lot, I'm sorry. Oh, this is where I find out I've been pronouncing it wrong the whole time as well. Now, when this giant had tried to carry the rocks and the stones of his castle, he ended up carrying too much, and it was too heavy for him to be able to fly properly. So, as he flew, his toe dragged along the ground, creating what is now known as the Pyhäjärvi River. Again, I've probably got that wrong, and I'm really, really sorry. I found out during this research that Finnish is actually considered one of the hardest languages to learn, which I am very much experiencing right now. There's another significantly more detailed story that comes from the region of Kainuu, in which Hiisi built his castle and settled in a place called Sotkamo. In 1674, a Finnish writer sent a letter which described a lot of like local folk beliefs of the area, including that of this particular Hiisi, who was actually believed to be the son of an ancient epic hero from both Finnish and Estonian folklore. Now, there's a particular legend from the end of the 16th century when Russia and Sweden had border disputes on what is now the border of present-day Finland, where persecuted Finns and some of the persecutors would hide in the forests of Kainuu. During this time, the persecutors kidnapped a young girl from Sotkamo and took her to the forest to serve as a servant maid for the hostess of a hidden cabin within the forest. Now, the girl was trying to plan her escape, so she asked the hostess where she could find a particular lake that was sort of located close to her hometown. But the hostess only told her that the sun rises in Russia and sets over this lake. So one spring night, the young girl was able to make her escape, and she fled just in the direction of the sunset. As she was escaping, she came across this huge ravine that absolutely terrified her based on its pure size. But once she reached her village in Sotkamo, she roused the villagers and told them what happened. Now, the villagers wanted to take revenge by attacking this cabin, and the girl was then able to use that ravine as a landmark to guide them back to it. At which point, the villagers burned the cabin down with the persecutors still inside. It was said that this was how this Hiisi's nest was first discovered, but this discovery only marked the beginning of various different legends in that area. So sometime after the cabin had been destroyed, a devil or ogre called Hiisi began moving around the area and causing havoc for all the townsfolk. Then from the 17th to 19th century, various tales were told about the discovery of this Hiisi's nest, even after the time of the persecution had ended, with these stories being passed down through generations about the great and mighty Hiisi, who had originally lived on like the highest point of that region. Now, these tales stated that people actually originally worshipped the Hiisi, but everything changed with the arrival of Christianity. A church was then built in Sotkamo. However, the constant ringing of the bells greatly annoyed the Hiisi, so he tried to destroy the church by throwing large stones from his settlement. Eventually, however, the Hiisi had to admit defeat, so it gathered its household and livestock, which mainly consisted of game, to move to the Hiidenportti ravine, which is what became known as Hiisi's Gate. Local deer hunters from the area had aided the Hiisi in escaping, and as thanks to them, he donated some of his gold treasures, and then he hid the rest of the treasures so deep within the ravine that it has never been possible to find them again. In honour of the gold that was given to them by the Hiisi, the deer hunters in the area had promised to come and worship the Hiisi on the first weekend of July every year, offering sacrifices to him in a practice that actually continued for centuries, all the way up until like as late as the 1960s. Though by that point the style of worship had changed quite a bit and they'd sort of abandoned the idea of like sacrifices, and it became much more of a celebration with drinking and sort of dancing in honor of this great giant, which I'll be honest sounds really, really fun. Interestingly enough though, the aspect of this tale that refers to the kidnapped girl is generally considered by both historians and folklorists to not be true, at least within regards to the actual folklore of the area. According to researchers, the tale is simply just not believable, and there are many similar stories that have been told around the world. So they believe it may have been an international tale that then became sort of adapted with local legends. Although there is another tale that relates specifically to the lake that the young girl had asked about, also within the Kainuu region, known as Lake Oulu, which is the 5th largest lake in the country. And it's said that the Hiisi wanted to cross the lake but couldn't, so he scooped up a load of earth from Partamo, which is another area within Kainuu, and threw it into the lake, which resulted in what is now known as the Manamansalo Island. Now, as is evident within these folktales, the word Hiisi is quite often used within place names, but more so in its plural form, which is hidet. So things like Hidenporti or Hidenlina. Now, in the 1930s, an archaeologist identified 15 or 16 potential Hiisi locations within Finland, and then in 1967, a linguist identified 14 Iron Age cemeteries as being Hiisi sites. These lists were both based primarily on the presence of some kind of element of the word Hiisi within the place names, and the locations were often very sort of high up, or they were close to water, often included sacred trees, springs, and something known as cup-marked stones. Now, side note on these, because they're quite interesting, cup-marked stones are a form of like prehistoric art that was found all over Europe, with sort of variations of it found basically everywhere else in the world. And it was basically some kind of small indentation in a rock or a stone that was often then surrounded by concentric circles that were also etched into the stone. And some of them had like a linear channel, almost like a gutter, that ran out from the centre. I've seen quite a few photos of them and they look really cool and very odd. But I think what makes them even more interesting is the fact that for the most part, their purpose is basically unknown. Now, moving away slightly from the geographical connotations of the word Hiisi, their use in spells or magic songs is equally as fascinating, because again, Hiisi was often used as a prefix, but in this case for sort of figurative expressions. For example, a Hiisi's bandy legs referred to a hare, the animal, while the braid of hair of Hiisi's girl referred to a snake. A Hiisi's eye was a lizard, and a Hiisi's bird meant a hornet or wasp. Which again is another sort of interesting comparison when you look at like old ingredients that are sort of stereotypically associated with things like witchcraft and potions, like the fact that Eye of Newt is actually just mustard seeds. A fun sidestep on this as well, in the realm of potions and ingredients, eye was generally used when referring to the blossom or seed of a plant, while the guts represented the roots, the tail was the stem of the plant, and hair referred to like dried out herbs. So if someone said that they were using rat guts in some kind of potion, they would actually be referring to valerian root. Now, alongside these numerous animals, Hiisi was often used as a prefix for various diseases and illnesses. So Hiisi's son or cat referred to toothache, whilst Hiisi's toadstool or filth was linked to swelling and tumours. And Hiisi on its own was quite often used to sort of refer to like ailments in general. And there was one particular reference I found where Hiisi's name was used as part of a curse that you would put on someone if they showed signs of envy. And this particular curse went, whoever looks with envious glance, keeps turning round with jealous eye, causes bewitchment with his mouth, or imprecates with words, may the slag of Hiisi fill his eyes, the soot of Hiisi soil his face, may a fiery bung plug up his mouth, may Lempo's lock clinch fast his jaws, may his mouth get overgrown with moss, the root of his tongue be broken off, May one of his eyes like honey run, like butter may the other flow into the raging fire, into Hiisi's bin of coals. May his head dry onto stone and skin grow on top. Which, I mean, as far as curses go, like, that's pretty intense. Now, these particular associations obviously led to Hiisi's name carrying fairly negative connotations. However, not all references to Hiisi were about like pain and punishment and illness. There was a folk song written about travelling, and in it said that the good horses lived at Hiisi's place on the mountains, and there was another song that actually spoke of Hiisi as being the origin or the creator of the horse. There is some debate about that particular aspect though, because others believe it may have been like a mistranslation or a substitution, and that Hiisi was actually originally associated with elk, reindeer and ox. Now, alongside the association with horses and reindeer and elk, Hiisi was also believed to guide and help forest hunters when they were trying to catch game. Though there are interesting creation tales that credit Hiisi as the origin for certain animals, or individual parts of the animal. For example, Hiisi is credited as being the creator of a cat's tail, or with regards to a raven, its neck, body, legs, guts, and one of its eyes. I'll be honest though, I don't know who was credited with the creation of the other eye. There's one tale in particular that tells the creation of the snake, in that a string of saliva fell from the mouth of a sleeping Hiisi, which was then eaten by an ogress. Now, this ogress is actually quite a well-known figure within Finnish folklore, and her name, bear with me, is Sayojata. So she proceeds to eat this string of saliva, but upon doing so, it burnt her throat, so she coughed it back up. Then once it had dried out, Hiisi then gave it life, and then came the snake. Which, I mean, I feel so bad for snakes. They always get such a bad rap in like folklore and mythology in general. That's such a grim origin story. Now, unlike other characters from folklore, there's not a huge amount of like modern day usage with regards to the Hiisi. I think in some part based on the sort of confusion around the origin and actual meaning of the word. It is a fairly sort of niche, localized mythology, and it's often translated into other creatures and vice versa. For example, the English word goblin is translated into Hiisi in Finnish due to the numerous similarities between a typical goblin and a Hiisi. And fun fact on etymology and word usage, in modern day Finnish, Hiisi and its derivatives hito and hitolainen are actually considered mild profanities. So I offer my sincere apologies to any Finnish viewers for essentially just swearing at you the whole time. I'd love to know what you guys think, because again, this feels like one of those folklore stories where something that had sort of a pagan-esque origin was then twisted when Christianity got involved, and then it's essentially like demonized, and the creatures involved became these really negative, evil beings. The research into this one was a little bit tricky because it is so much of a kind of niche subject. Like I said, I first heard about it based on a story that I'd found in a thread on Reddit, and because there's no sort of set definition or agreed upon definition of what it all means, it's all very much sort of up to interpretation. So I'd love to know what you guys think about it, what your interpretations are. On the back of that, because this is a bit more of a kind of vague mythology term rather than a specific sort of creature, the look that I wanted to do for this was a bit more conceptual, a bit more abstract in relation to the subject topic. The general idea I had was focused more on this original idea of like a sacred grove or sacred piece of land, hence all the leaves and the greenery, but I wanted to add that sort of twisted element to it, so kind of like the land was being poisoned almost, I guess, which, without meaning to get too deep and meaningful, was kind of like a way of representing the influence that Christianity had in turning what originally meant sacred grove or sacred area and turning it into this like demonic, evil troll creature. I hope that translated in the look, but you'll have to let me know. So yes, let me know what you think of the lore, let me know what you think of the look. Big thank you once again to my patrons for helping me choose this week's topic. I will leave a link to my Patreon in the description box down below. Don't forget to follow me on my other social medias as well. Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, all of that. But other than that, I hope you all have a fabulous day. I love and appreciate all of you very, very much. And I will see you all in the next one. Bye.